Hello and welcome back to So You Got a Life Sci Degree. We're your hosts, Farida and Lisa, two life sci undergrad students trying to navigate our future careers. This is episode 20, and we're talking to Dr. Gioia Massa about plant research in space. How are you doing today, Lisa?
I'm doing great. I finally moved into my new apartment. Very, very exciting.
Ooh.
And I have so many stories, but I'm just going to pick one to tell, which is the story of the Wi-Fi catastrophe. So as I kind of already told you, I moved in on May 2nd, and that was the day that the Rogers technician was supposed to come to install our home internet, like wire up the modem, like all that stuff. So technician 1 comes, and he takes a long look, and he says, I need to call another technician. I can't do this.
Okay.
And since that happened, over these long weeks, I have learned why that was the case, which is that our building, because it's a brand new building, it was built using this new technology that Rogers has that it seems that 95% of Rogers does not even know that this exists.
Okay.
And only maybe 1% of the technicians are actually trained in this technology.
Interesting.
So he called a second technician. The second technician came a couple hours later. Technician number 2 spent 20 minutes to 30 minutes on the phone with Rogers customer support. That's right. Our technician called Rogers customer support. He was walking around our living room, talking on the phone while I was trying to unpack my stuff. And then his conclusion was, we're going to have to send another technician. And we were like, okay. And so that technician was scheduled for the day after. Around whatever time that guy was supposed to come, 12 p.m., whatever, I get a text that says, hi, I'm outside. So, because it's an apartment building, I say, okay, I'm going to meet you down in the lobby because I don't have the intercom set up yet. So I go down and he's not there.
Oh, no.
And I was very confused by this. And so luckily I was able to call the number back and I asked, where are you? I don't see you.
Mm-hmm.
He said, I'm outside the house.
Oh, no.
And I said, where are you? And he said some address. And my brain went, oh no. Because I don't know why. Rogers, I feel like this is like the principle of program design where it's like a program should only be able to access the things that it needs to access. Like Facebook doesn't need to access your camera unless you're doing a video call. But Rogers just goes for the strategy of we want to know everything. We want to know all the information possible about everyone using our accounts to the point where it's in excess and we don't know what to do with it.
No.
And one of those examples is that because my roommate who set up the account for our internet for the apartment, she also has services through Rogers for her personal home address.
Right.
And so every time they send a technician, they send it over to her house. Even if you are talking to someone and you tell them, hi, this problem is with address X, they will still send it. It's like they don't think. Anyways, and so clearly that didn't work out. And we just sent a random technician to loiter outside their house in Markham. So okay, so we booked a 4th technician.
Oh, man.
The fourth technician actually figured out, got the Wi-Fi running. It broke down 3 days later after a power outage. And then I was out of Wi-Fi for, I believe, something like 14 days. Yeah, during a pandemic in which you cannot go to the library or cafes. And yeah, so it was not great.
Yeah.
But currently I have Wi-Fi. I don't know if that will continue in the future.
Knock on all the woods.
Knock on all the wood. Yeah, luckily I have a lot around me. But yeah, so that has been an interesting and extremely frustrating struggle. I think that if Rogers were to pay me $15 for every single hour that I've been on the phone with them, I would have made a few $100s from this whole experience. But sadly, that is not the case, and they're not even compensating us because it's a bulk account.
What?
So,
sad.
Yeah. So
sorry
for
happened. This not very fun Wi-Fi journey.
Yeah, well, I mean, I learned what a coax cable is, so something came out of it. How are you doing?
Nice. Yeah, kind of similar. Moved apartments, living with a roommate now, but the more exciting thing that just happened in my life is that I got vaccinated. Well, we both did, but it's very exciting.
Yeah. Old news, man. Been there.
Yeah. So I was talking to my friend about this where it felt like the vaccine was never going to come, and then within a span of like 2 weeks, it seemed like everyone got vaccinated.
Yeah, I think it's because they suddenly got a huge shipment.
Right.
My girlfriend works at a vaccine clinic, and I remember her saying that they were doubling the number of people they were vaccinating per day.
I noticed this particularly when I was actually editing podcast stuff, when I was like so excited that I might be able to get vaccinated soon. And then within the week when I was editing it, it's like everyone already had gotten vaccinated.
Right.
And it was so interesting how
Yeah.
quickly it changed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully things will start to get better.
Yeah, exactly. Also, I feel like the lady who gave me a vaccine barely looked at me. So, like, I don't know if it went in me or not, but I'm sure it was fine.
Oh my goodness.
It was just like a jab somewhere in my arm.
You just vaccinated the air around
Right,
your
yeah.
arm. It was like, that's close enough.
Yeah. Anyway, Lisa, what is the squirrel of the week?
The squirrel of this week is Donut Squirrel.
Ooh.
I had him previously called Sarah Squirrel because Sarah is my friend who suggested the squirrel to me. And clearly, if you say Donut Squirrel, that kind of reveals what the whole situation is about. But anyways, you are now permitted to click the link that is listed below.
Ooh.
If you do this, you will see a squirrel sitting
wow.
on a fence in Hamilton. He is a substantial fellow.
Right.
And he is holding a donut in I want to say like a very cute way, but also I feel like it's the only way a squirrel can hold a full-size donut.
Well, what if you have the donut on its side and hold it through the hole?
That's true. You can hold it. I suppose you could rotate it 90 degrees and hold it that way. But the way that he's holding it is, if you were to search like a squirrel donut sticker, this is the position what you would get.
Right.
And so it's just very cute, and he's holding it and presumably eating on it, and I'm sure it's doing wonders for his digestion.
Also, this donut looks completely whole, like not messed up at all. Like, where did a squirrel just get a fully fine donut?
Maybe he's gonna carry it around and then leave it on someone's windowsill.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all come full circle.
Right. Very cute. All right, are you ready to interview with Gioia?
Super excited and ready.
This episode is sponsored by Resume Worded. Resume Worded is an AI-powered online career platform that gives you instant tailored feedback on your resume and LinkedIn profile. They offer 3 main tools: Score My Resume, which uses AI technology to instantly score your resume according to what recruiters are looking for; Targeted Resume, which analyzes job descriptions to identify important keywords and skills missing from your resume; and LinkedIn Review, which identifies gaps in your profile to increase your visibility. Each of these features provides specific feedback to help you get past automated resume filtering and land interviews. They both offer free tools and optional paid features. I've been using Resume Worded myself for the past few months and am finding it really improves my job applications. I'm consistently surprised by how many weaknesses it is able to identify and the helpfulness of the step-by-step feedback. I'm also subscribed to their email newsletter. I normally hate email newsletters, but this one genuinely provides succinct and helpful advice that I would have never thought of otherwise. To check them out, visit resumeworded.com.
This week's guest is Dr. Gioia Massa. Gioia is a project scientist at NASA Kennedy Space Center. She has worked at NASA for the past 10 years, improving the cultivation of crops in space for future missions. She holds a bachelor's in plant science from Cornell University, as well as a PhD in plant biology, space biology, and geoscience from Penn State University. She received the Presidential Early Career Award for Scientists and Engineers in 2019, which is the highest honor given by the U.S. government to scientists beginning their research careers. Thank you for joining us today, Gioia.
My pleasure.
I am really excited to interview you because I'm currently studying molecular biology. One of my potential career interests is human space research. So we are so excited to have someone on who knows about space life science research. And, with that being said, could you let us know about what are the different branches of space life science research?
Sure. There's kind of a spectrum. So, we have space biology research. There's specifically human research. And then there's, the area of astrobiology research, which is fascinating, but I'm not very involved or knowledgeable about that area. Within space biology, which is where most of my work is done, we have different foci on plant research, on animals, cells, microorganisms. I also work with the human research program. And so there are different kind of centers that focus on this. So Kennedy Space Center, we're known for launching rockets, but we also are the plant research center within NASA. Ames Research Center is the animal research center. We both do some microbial work. Ames also does a lot of cellular work. And then Johnson Space Center in Houston is where the human research program is located. And so, I work closely with different scientists at these different locations. There's also some work at the Jet Propulsion Lab, especially in terms of microorganisms. And so, there's a lot of collaboration, a lot of interdependence of all these different areas. Obviously, if we're growing plants, we're doing this, in many times to support humans, to produce food for the humans. So we have to work closely with the human research program to make sure that we're meeting the needs that they have and the requirements that they have. Astrobiology is primarily also located out at Ames Research Center in California. And so they're doing, a lot of the really cool work on the search for life and also on the evolution of how life formed on Earth. So there's really, a pretty broad spectrum of biology research at NASA. Planetary protection is something else your listeners may have heard of. And that's, how do we ensure that as we go further away, that we keep life, Earth life, basically away from planetary surfaces like Mars to be able to understand if we find life on Mars, where it came from. So that's really important. And also, if we bring things back from other locations, how do we ensure that there's no contamination to life on Earth? So there's a lot of different and important roles for life science and space research.
Yeah, that all sounds really cool. Maybe this would be a good time for you to tell us what your own research is about and kind of what some of the goals are.
Definitely. So the research that I work on with some colleagues at Kennedy Space Center is in the area of space crop production. So we, as I said, are the plant center for the agency, and our team is focused on, how do we grow crops, grow plants to support the astronauts, to help provide nutrients, potentially to help provide a psychological benefit to the crew. And also, in the future, we're thinking of things like bioregenerative life support, which is essentially using biology to support the crew the way that Earth supports us here. So plants will help to recycle the atmosphere. They may help to recycle the water, and you may have other aspects of that system where you have microorganisms helping to clean water, recycle wastes, etc. So starting to close the loop and be more sustainable. So that's really where our interests lie. My earlier research, in graduate school was more on the kind of fundamental side of the fundamental applied biology spectrum, where I looked more at how plants sense gravity and sense and respond to mechanical stimuli. And so it was more cell biology. But since then, I've migrated more, I should say, to the applied side, looking at agriculture and how to grow food.
That's really cool. Kind of tangential, but yeah, I can imagine I think it's called gravitropism is really important for plants. That might be kind of tricky in space if there's a minimal gravity.
Yes.
So kind of like getting a bit more into your research, could you let us know about some current or maybe past studies that you've worked on as an example?
Well, I came to NASA in the NASA postdoctoral program, which was an opportunity for postdocs to work at NASA field centers on specific projects. And my project was to develop plans and procedures for growing crops in a new piece of hardware at the time, which was called Veggie. So Veggie is a small plant growth chamber. Yeah, it's a cute name. And it's a small plant growth chamber that's on the International Space Station now. It wasn't when I started. It's about the size of a small dormitory refrigerator. And we grow, around 6 heads of lettuce in Veggie or 6 different types of crop plants. So I came up with the methods for growing and tested a wide variety of different plants. So when I was hired on with NASA, I kind of continued that work, and I led the science team for the first tests of Veggie when it was sent to the space station initially, which was in 2014. And we've tested different crop types. I'm still very involved with that testing. We test, a variety of different plants. Recently, I've led a grant that was using Veggie to test different red to blue light ratios and how the color of the light, impacts how well the plant grows, how nutritious the plant is, how delicious the plant is. We actually have astronauts doing taste tests. We're looking at microbial food safety, which is another really important aspect of growing plants for humans. You want to make sure that they're safe to eat. And then we're also starting to do the behavioral health benefits to see how plants impact the astronauts' well-being while they're in space.
That's all super cool. Again, maybe a little bit off topic, but I actually took a plant biology course for like the first time last semester. And it's really cool hearing you mention things like red and blue light, because I'm like, oh, I know that that's one of the ways they can initiate a shade response and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, really cool how all that stuff can be applied to space research. And kind of along those lines, you know, we mentioned before how obviously there are challenges to growing plants in space, such as issues with gravity. What would you say are some of the main like challenges or obstacles to being able to successfully grow crops in space?
Now, we like to think of these challenges as opportunities. And, you know, the main one that's been kind of plaguing us so far is really the challenge of watering plants in space. You know, behavior of fluids is really strange without gravity. Air and water don't mix well. So, you know, a lot of your listeners have probably seen the videos of the astronauts, you know, playing with water and or their orange drink or whatever. And you'll get these blobs, and it's really cool. And it looks like it's a lot of fun, but it's a challenge for biology, because if you're trying to water your plants, plant roots like us respire. They need oxygen. And when you put bubbles of air in a blob of water floating in space, they basically coalesce into a giant bubble of air with a shell of water. The air and water don't mix well. So it's hard to get the oxygen dissolved in the water. So I tend to think of it as a bit of a tightrope that we walk, and on one side is flood and the other side is drought, and we kind of fall off on either side when we're watering our plants. So that's been one of the big challenges, but it's interesting because we've actually had a lot of people trying to help us out with this challenge, and that's really great. And there's a lot of new innovations coming out because we have physicists, fluid physicists, we have, you know, horticulturalists, and we have engineering student design teams all working on trying to come up with new and better ways to deliver water and nutrients to plants. So that's really exciting. And I think we're going to have a lot of great research on that in the future.
Yeah, definitely. That sounds super cool. And it's something that you wouldn't really think about on Earth. You wouldn't think, oh, watering is the issue. You would probably think gravity or maybe radiation, but that is super cool. Yeah, like not stuff you usually think about.
Yeah, gravity, the plants sort of adjust to. You know, it's interesting because on Earth, gravity is kind of the main director for plant growth. But in the absence of gravity on the space station, plants just adapt because they're so great at taking all of these different, you know, environmental stimuli coming in and then developing an integrated response. And so they just deal with it. There are a lot of changes in gene expression and things like that a lot of my colleagues have studied. But if you can get that environment for the plants right, they'll grow pretty normally. But the other thing that you mentioned is radiation. And we do have, you know, scientists at Kennedy Space Center that are working on radiation. One of my colleagues, Dr. Ye Zhang, she's focused in that area. And, you know, that's a major concern. The space station is not getting a lot of the dangerous space radiation. But when we go to the moon or onto Mars, there will be those types of radiations. Right now, we're protected by the Earth's magnetic field for most of the time that the astronauts are on the space station. But radiation is a very, very important concern for the future and something we have to figure out.
Yeah, that's all super exciting stuff. You mentioned a little bit about, you know, understanding that when you're near Earth, you're under the protection of its magnetic field. And so things like that. This is something that I've wondered for myself. If you're someone who is interested in working in space lifestyle research, how much knowledge would you say that you need to have about non-biology related matters? So things like engineering or orbital mechanics. How much of that do you feel that you yourself need to know to be able to do your job effectively?
That's a really interesting question. I think everything we do obviously is teamwork, but it's one of the things that I've learned a fair amount along the way. You know, I've learned how to talk with engineers and find common languages. I mean, we don't even measure things the same way, right? And so we have to establish common language, you know, and what I've realized is that a lot of the really important and interesting challenges in science are not just in one field. they're in these intersections of multiple fields. So I think the more that you can explore other areas and learn and be able to communicate with experts in other areas, the better off your science will be. So, I never thought I would have a very good relationship with microgravity fluid physicists, but now these are some of my favorite people, and we talk all the time. I work very closely with engineers. I'm more of a plant scientist, more of a horticulturalist, plant physiologist, but I work a lot with microbiology, and with molecular biology because we have to understand the food safety of the crops that we're growing. So I think in many ways it helps to be interested in a lot of different areas and to be able to talk and to communicate, because everybody has their own, skill sets and their own knowledge. But the more that you can get common languages, the better chance you have of solving the challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. Taking maybe a step back and going back to what your job is, could you maybe let us know a bit about what your main responsibilities are as a lead project scientist?
So I wear, I guess I would say about 3 different hats at NASA. So, one of the hats is to conduct research or report research that's being conducted. And so, as I said, we're focusing in space crop production. The other hat that I wear, or another hat that I wear, is to work with external investigators. So NASA awards grants for scientists at universities around the United States. And there are other external parties that are coming in, and they're interested in using some of the hardware that we've developed, like Veggie or our other plant growth chamber, which is the advanced plant habitat, or other hardware that NASA manages and supports. And so we work very closely with these scientists to help their research be successful in space. So we'll meet with them, we'll explain to them, the challenges of doing science on the space station, come up with criteria that will be how you can define if their science is successful. We work with them through the pre-flight verification tests. So we do a number of verification tests before their experiments fly, testing out their science and our hardware, developing procedures for the astronauts to actually do the science, because that's all, written in a certain way. We might film training videos. And so we'll run their verification tests at Kennedy Space Center in growth chambers, environmental chambers that simulate the atmosphere of the space station. So similar temperature, humidity, light, and of course, carbon dioxide, which is a really high, concentration on space station. And so we work with these investigators to get their science done on space station. And then the third hat that I wear is I do quite a lot of education and outreach. We have interns at Kennedy Space Center and postdocs that I mentor, but I also, work with schools and students, whether they're, engineering design teams at universities or even middle schools and high schools, which we have working with us on different programs to help us collect data for NASA. So that's really one of my passions and something that I think is really important.
Yeah, definitely. And maybe part of the reason why you're on this podcast today. And we really appreciate being here. So yay. And then the other question that we kind of wanted to know about, maybe the nitty-gritty details of your position, is just kind of what your daily schedule usually looks like. I think this can be kind of obscure for when you're looking from the outside in to a job. And so let's say this was before COVID.
Right.
Let's say just things like what time would you arrive at work? What time would you take your lunch break? How many hours would you work a week? That kind of thing.
Well, it varies. I am a federal employee, and it's a salaried position. So generally we work a 40-hour work week, but obviously science doesn't always get done on a regular schedule, as we all know. Generally, it's sort of an 8 to 4:30 timeframe for most of my colleagues and myself at Kennedy Space Center. But we also work with international partners and people throughout the United States. So often that means we'll have to shift our schedule. The International Space Station is on Greenwich Mean Time. So
Yeah.
if we have activities going on the space station, it starts really early in the morning. And of course, we're always incredibly excited when we have those activities. So if you have to get up at 2 or 3 in the morning, while it's a bit of a bummer, it's the excitement far outweighs that. Also, rockets don't launch, at any given hour. They launch all of the time. So, my colleagues may be supporting things at any hour of the day or night. But generally, we try to keep a fairly, normal work schedule. We try to take lunch, but we don't usually do it. A lot of my lunches are sitting at my desk. I actually have a lot of meetings even before COVID, and now I have a lot of virtual meetings, but some days I would have, 6 or 8 hours of meetings, and I would just be running from one to the next because it'll be everything from meeting, with our program managers to meeting with the investigators of our team to Skyping with the classroom or whatever. And so, but a lot of meetings, we have a lot of project meetings, when we're doing different experiments, we'll have teams that meet together to talk about the status of all the different experiments. So at this point in my career, I don't get to do as much hands-on research. When I was a postdoc, I was much more in the lab and I was doing a lot more of the hands-on research. Yeah. And even when I started as a project scientist, I was doing that. But a couple of years ago, I became a senior project scientist. And so now it's more, I do a lot of PowerPoint charts and a lot of documents and review things.
Right.
But I do, when we are actually working on site, I do try to go down and see the plants, very regularly and check in with the scientists that are doing the experiment, just so that I know what's going on. And because we have quite a lot of research. We have a pretty small team, but we actually have quite a lot of research. And so it's really important, even in my current role, to be able to understand the different research that's going on and to start to see the big picture and to see how this research fits together to advance our needs in the area of space crop production. So I try to think now more strategically and tactically, like what research needs to be done to move us forward, because there are so many challenges that we have to solve before we can sustainably support humans on long duration missions. So keeping up with what the actual research is going on is really important. And I love to help out if I can. I also usually, will meet with my interns and postdocs and keep it up with what they're doing as well. So, you don't want to be ignorant or not really understand, and you want to be able to answer any questions that come up. So, yeah, it changes a little bit every day, though. New things happen. We talk about putting out fires or because there'll be an urgent need for something or some experiment is not working. And so then we'll take time to troubleshoot. So I think we all, while we have all these great plans, we also tend to be reactive to try to keep everything working in the way that it should work. So, space research is hard and it can cause a lot of unexpected things, when you're growing plants without this buffer that we have on Earth of this, amazing resources and plentiful air and water and space that we have. And we're growing things in much more small, contained, controlled environments. If things get out of balance, then you're going to have problems. Your plants just won't grow well. And so we're constantly kind of assessing the environment and trying to identify challenges before they become limiting.
Thank you for the insight. In some ways, it sounds very much like a PI job. Like in many of the ways, like you're designing your own experiments, you're supervising people, which is, not surprising. It seems like the two roles are kind of similar. We kind of wanted to also ask you about like your educational journey and how you yourself got to where you are today. And so we were wondering if you could let us know how you got interested in space life science research. You did do your undergrad degree in plant biology, but from there, what got you interested in studying plants in space, and how exactly did you go about graduating from, like a bachelor's of science to becoming a project scientist at NASA?
Yeah, well, my journey actually started pretty young. I was very fortunate to have a teacher when I was in 7th grade who was actually invited to Kennedy Space Center to learn about the work going on here, part of a teacher training experience that they had at the time. And he spent, I think, a week here and collected all this video and information about the work going on for life support and plant growth. And he brought this back to his agriculture class. And I was just fascinated by this. I mean, I was 12 years old and I decided that was what I wanted to.
Wow.
So it took a long time, obviously, and a lot of years of going to school. But even at that time, I worked with my junior high ag teacher. I continued to take agriculture classes in high school as well as my academic classes. And they were wonderfully supportive. I got to build hydroponic systems, as a student and test and try different crops. And I even wrote a letter to NASA as a high school student. My now colleague answered that letter, which was amazing.
Wow,
so
that's so cool.
Yeah, it was really cool. And we're very fortunate because NASA has some really incredible educational opportunities. So, I decided that obviously when I was pretty young, but then when I went to college, I did apply for a NASA internship in the summer. So even though I thought I wanted to do this, I was doing plant biology, plant science at Cornell. But I came to Kennedy Space Center in the summer of my senior year, I don't know, one of those summers. And I got to actually experience working at a NASA center. And so it was sort of like, it's like those little plus up mushrooms in Super Mario Brothers or whatever, it's like, it gave me the little boost to be back and to keep going in that direction. It was really impactful. And then as a graduate student, I worked with an advisor who was doing plant gravity research. Again, it was very more fundamental. We were looking at young plants, a lot of microscopy, but I also had an opportunity to work on a spaceflight experiment, on a space shuttle experiment as a graduate student. And that one was interesting because I got to work with engineers as well. So this was the first time I really started working with engineers. We built stuff. I got to do machining and it was a lot of fun. So that was another sort of plus up. And then I started going to professional conferences that involved, a lot of NASA science. So I started to go to a society, which at the time was called the American Society for Gravitational and Space Biology, ASGSB. Now we've actually merged the biology and the physical sciences. So the name of the society is American Society for Gravitational and Space Research. But I started going to those meetings and meeting all of the scientific community working in this area as a grad student, and being able to present my research as a grad student was really important. And that led to postdoctoral opportunity at Purdue University. So I knew that I loved the space side of things, but I didn't really want to do the microscopy and the cell biology anymore. So I met, a professor at this conference who was leading a NASA center in advanced life support, and he was leading it with the plants and the horticulture and LED lighting. So I went to Purdue and I worked with him on LED lighting for crop growth as a postdoc. And that was pretty much when the economy tanked. And so there were no jobs. I sort of started interviewing for jobs, but I still, wanted to be here doing what I was doing. So he was wonderful, and he was able to keep me on as a research scientist even when my postdoc ended. So it was kind of a soft money position, they call it, but he had grants, including NASA grants that were able to fund me. And then, I continued to go to scientific meetings and learned about the community, made lots of connections, so that when a NASA postdoctoral opportunity opened up here at Kennedy Space Center, I had a good feel for what type of research would be needed and how to do it. And so I applied for that and I was accepted. And that's how I began to work with the Veggie system. And then that opportunity, I was fortunate enough to be hired on as a NASA civil servant when that opportunity, was finishing up. So a lot of it was luck, but it was also kind of stick-to-itiveness, I guess, and so I was fairly stubborn about what I wanted to do, and I just kept doing it until I was really well qualified to do it, or fairly well qualified. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We had a related question, which was let's say me, am a recently graduated student who I have a bachelor's in life sci and I'm interested in space life science research. I think you kind of encapsulated this when you were talking about your own experience. But if you were to say to this person, these are some steps that you can take education wise or work wise that will kind of get you on that path to one day having a similar position to me at NASA or the CSA, what would you recommend to them?
Well, I would say, first of all, figure out what your happy environment is. You don't always have an opportunity to do that as an undergraduate or as a graduate student. But, for me as a graduate student, sitting in dark rooms, staring down a microscope, it wasn't my happy environment. Working in growth chambers and greenhouses with large plants, with crop plants where I could explain to my mom, I'm growing food. That was a more comfortable place for me. And so I was much happier when I was working in my happier environment, my more comfortable place. So I think that's a really important thing to start with, whether you like working at a microbial level or at the level of whole organisms or at the level of ecosystems, trying to understand what your comfort zone is really important. So in addition to figuring out what your happy environment for work is, the next advice I have is to go to these scientific meetings and to make connections with experts in the area that you're interested in working with. If you meet them as an undergraduate or a graduate student, then, they'll let you know, oh, I have postdoctoral opportunities, or, here's a job opening. And so just being able to make the connections, volunteering in a lab as an undergraduate student, for instance, and trying things out to find, okay, what area of research are you really interested in? Because if you're really interested and passionate about it, you're going to be really good at it, and if you're not that interested, it's never going to be what you want, even if it sounds great on paper. So it's really important to try these things out. Doing internships, if you can, at a space agency, if you're interested in space life sciences, is a really great opportunity to see what it's actually like to work at the space agency. But a lot of the really cool space life sciences is going on at universities around the world. So don't feel like you have to work at a space center. You can also, intern or try out other laboratories. And then, just making the connections. Part of it's just keeping aware and current of where the research is going, looking for opportunities to do experiments, whether they're spaceflight experiments, whether they're grants, proposals, student team projects, engineering design challenges, whatever, and just getting as much experience as you can in those areas, I think, is really important.
That's great. Thanks for the advice. So you mentioned how not all space life sci research is done just at NASA or the CSA. There are also other entities that do this research. Could you let us know what those different categories of workplaces are, as well as what the job availability is like for each of those places?
Well, there's a whole spectrum, so I think there's academia, obviously, and then there's industry. And even within industry, there are small businesses that are developing tools, technologies, conducting research in the space life sciences. And that's really exciting because there are a lot of really innovative ideas coming from that community. There are also large businesses, large companies that are doing research related to this.
Cough, SpaceX.
Well, a whole number of them. And it's really interesting. There are some opportunities for public-private partnerships. So, for instance, NASA has opportunities for small businesses that we can put out topics where we need development of a specific technology or specific approach. And small businesses are able to apply and write proposals to get funding to do this. And then when they do that, we at NASA get to be involved with them. So, for instance, I'm the technical monitor or contracting officer's representative. We have all these terms to work with small businesses to develop different technologies. I'm working with a small business right now that's working on a Mars greenhouse, which is super exciting and cool. I mean, we want to have a greenhouse on Mars, and they're building one. We also have opportunities to work with larger businesses where, if there's a specific technology or approach that we're mutually interested in, we can work with them. They can write a proposal to use some of NASA's time or resources or expertise to help them develop their technology. And so, and there's amazing things going on in industry that are benefiting everybody. We're just really grateful for all the efforts coming out in this area.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of related to that, as an example, the field of environmental law, I would say there are more people vastly who want to be environmental lawyers than there are positions available. And so in your honest opinion, what does the field of space life sci research look like in terms of job availability?
Well, this isn't the top of a lot of, for instance, companies, hiring pools, right? A lot of the companies are hiring engineers or they're hiring people to build rockets. But I think everyone is starting to realize, okay, now that we're building rockets or space stations or whatever, well, we need to have the ability to support the crew. We need to have the ability to do science. So there are more and more positions, I believe, opening up in these areas. It's not a huge community. The space life sciences community in general is fairly small. We know each other pretty well. And so I think it's one of those things that when you are interested in this area and you gain some experience and expertise, you can quickly meet the people that are interested in hiring those skills. So I do think there is demand for those skills, but obviously for people who have specific training or, a lot of passion. So while I don't think there are necessarily a ton of jobs, I also don't see that many unemployed space biologists out there. I think there's certainly opportunity. And, more and more universities are getting interested in space life sciences. And so that also means that if you're, perhaps interviewing for faculty positions, and this is an area that you want to get into, you can start to look at some of the early career grant opportunities or start to look at some of the partnerships with industry and build a program in this area. And, I've known a number of faculty who've built really successful research programs in the space life sciences.
That's really cool. Thanks for outlining that for us. And then the final question we wanted to ask you was, in your opinion, how do you think space life science research on a whole has changed in the past couple decades? And how do you see it changing moving forward? What are some of the things you're really excited about?
Well, I think we've been on the International Space Station for 20 years now, and we've had humans continuously living in space for 20 years, which is incredible. And the ISS, it took quite a while to assemble. It's a very incredible resource. It's an orbiting laboratory, and we're testing kind of fundamental biological and physical, sciences there, but we're also testing these more applied technologies for the future, like crop production technologies or others. And so I think this is, having this amazing test bed has really opened up a tremendous amount of knowledge and of opportunity to do research. Now with the commercial crew program and having more astronauts on the space station, all of a sudden we have a lot more astronaut time to do science. So even, in just the last year, we've really opened up a lot more scientific potential of the space station. So it's really been very exciting to watch that go from, well, we don't have much crew time, you have to do a very minimal amount of science, to being able to have, more science being done. When we were flying the space shuttle, the space shuttle had a pretty limited area for science most of the time. In the past, there were a few opportunities where the shuttle payload bay was turned into a laboratory, and that was really great for our scientific community. But on a standard shuttle flight, there wasn't a lot of room to do science. So the space station has given us enhanced capabilities, but also just much longer duration research. The space shuttle would only be up for, days or a week or two, whereas the space station is permanently operated. So if we want to grow, in my case, if we want to grow tomatoes, we need over 100 days to grow and produce tomatoes. We couldn't have done that before, but now we can. So just the magnitude of research that we can do on the space station is huge. And so that's been great. And I hope we get to do a lot more research there. But then in the future, we're going to the moon, and we're planning for Mars. And what could be more exciting than that? We're going to be growing plants on other planets. We have a need to grow these plants to support the astronauts as they go on these amazing adventures of discovery. And I'm so honored and thrilled to be a part of it. And I just can't wait to see the future.
Yeah, I agree. When you think about it in the way of, like humanity in like 100 or 1,000 or, hopefully 5,000 years, just looking back on this time of this was kind of the seed of space exploration, which is just such an amazing time to be doing space research. Just to know that you're part of like the very beginning of kind of humans going off into space. Yeah, I just think that's super cool.
It is. And I think it's going to benefit everybody. That's the thing about space research is we learn things that have so many benefits for life on Earth. And we don't even know often when things are being developed that this technology or tool or research result is going to have a huge impact on the quality of everybody's lives. But if we can become more sustainable with how we live and survive in space, I think it will really help us to become more sustainable for the future of Earth as well.
Absolutely. All right. So that more or less wraps up the interview. Before we finish off, is there anything else you would like to add?
Well, I would just like to add that, one of the really cool things that we've been involved with is having students help out with NASA research. And so there are opportunities for citizen scientists around the world to help NASA advance the goals and to help, CSA and other space agencies advance our goals for space exploration. So I think if you're interested, look at citizen science opportunities to help space research. One of the things that's out right now is a joint challenge between NASA and CSA called the Deep Space Food Challenge. And this is where these space agencies are actually seeking the help of people from around the world to help solve some of these really hard problems of how we support astronauts in the future. So if your listeners are interested, they can contribute, they can form teams, they can come up with ideas for food systems of the future, and they can also win some prizes.
Yeah, I think I actually heard about that. One of my friends is in engineering, and he actually approached me about potentially working together on it. So I have actually heard of that. So yeah, definitely check that out. We will drop a link for both of those things in the show notes of the episode, so you can go click on those to check that out.
So for U.S. citizens who are at U.S. accredited universities, NASA does have internship opportunities, and we have these for undergraduate and graduate students. So if you're interested, you can learn more at intern.nasa.gov. There's also postdoctoral opportunities, as I mentioned, and those are both for U.S. citizens and non-U.S. citizen post-PhD scientists. So you can look up the NASA postdoctoral program, and you can see which opportunities are available, and these change all the time. And you can look at writing a proposal for those. So those would be some ways to engage in space research as you develop your career.
All right, amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It was so nice to talk to you. I'm really passionate about space and potentially space lifestyle research. So this was an absolute oh my God, the best thing ever. So yeah, thank you so much for your time. And I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
Hello, if you have made it all the way here, congratulations. It's time for a review of the podcast. Review of the podcast. Woo! Frida, what does this week's review say?
This week's review is from Hornet Hades. They write, "It's great. Passionate, informative interviews geared towards career choices for life-size students. even though I don't fit in that bucket, it's still interesting to hear what people do for a living.
Thank you, Hornet Hades, for that lovely review and for getting Frida to sound like Tony the Tiger. If you, lovely listener, would like to leave us a review, perhaps make us say something that sounds a little ridiculous, you can do so on Apple Podcasts, link in the show notes. Feel free to include honest feedback about the podcast. We would really love to hear your thoughts, and we will almost definitely read a review on the show.
I don't love this attempt to get me to say weird things.
This has been another episode of So You Got a Life Sci Degree with Dr. Gioia Massa about plant research in space. We want to give special thanks to our crew of lovely patrons, including our Little Leaf patrons Naeem, Daniil, Shafiq, and Shamima, and our fantastic foliage patron Stephanie. If you would like to become a supporter of this podcast, you can visit our Patreon at patreon.com/soyougotalifescidegree. The music you're hearing is No Regrets from audiohub.com. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.